Hello and welcome to another crochet pattern tutorial. I'm here now to show you how to work the final sweater in the wind sweater collection, the Boreas sweater. So Boreas was the northern wind and it was always the most unpredictable one. And so I pay homage to that in this pattern by doing a very fun texture. I'll be talking to you about that in here and it's going to be super fun, but it can get a little on the tricky and complicated side, but that's okay. You're going to be an expert by the time you're done with this video. So before you get started, we are going to need some materials. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the yarn. So I'm using a Chick That Knits. This is hand-dyed yarn. This is her Silky Singles. It is a fingering weight yarn in the color of Silver Fox. It is 70% superwash merino wool, 30% mulberry Italian silk, and it is just super soft and silky and perfect for the type of texture that you're going to get out of here. It's going to feel really good against the skin, and it's definitely a nice little treat for yourself to work with your hands as well. The next thing you'll need are some hooks. So the main hook we are going to be using is a smaller one. It's going to be a size C. That's a 2.75 millimeter hook. This is my Clover Amour, but you can use any kind of hook that gets gauge. So definitely make sure that you do a gauge swatch before figuring out which main hook you're going to use. And then what you're going to also need is a smaller hook. So I have a B hook, 2.25 millimeter, that is smaller for the ribbing section. So that's going to be the ribbing around the collar. There's going to be some ribbing around the cuffs and one around the bottom where the hem is. The other thing you're going to need that's very important are some notions, and that's going to be stitch markers. So I've got a few stitch markers here. You're going to need 12 stitch markers that are relatively the same, and then one unique one to mark the ends of rounds. And we'll be talking about how we're going to use those to do increases and to know when our beginning and end of rounds are. You're also going to need some dice or some sort of number generator of some kind that gives you an equal chance of each of the different numbers. So if you have a 12-sided die and a 6-sided die, that is perfect. If you do not have these, you can always just go online and just Google random number generator, and you can set it to be whatever numbers 1 through 12 or 1 through 6 that you need it. And then you'll also have a way of recording it either on your own paper, or if you get the pattern that you purchased with this or the Wind Sweater collection, it will come with a number tracker and a round tracker. The other thing you'll need are some yarn needles. So I've got yarn needles here in my little Furls yarn needle case and some scissors. You are not going to be seaming anything. This is a top-down seamless construction. It is a circular yoke, so you are not going to have to seam anything, but you are going to have yarn ends to weave in. So that's what the needles and the scissors are for. The other thing you're going to want is a tape measure of some kind because we are making a garment. We want to make sure that the garment is going to fit us. So we need to have a tape measurer so we can measure ourselves or whoever we're making this for to make sure that this fits. I do provide size recommendations in the pattern, so please make sure you check that to see which size you want to make for yourself or a loved one. The final thing that I do not have showing on here is blocking mats and blocking pins. You are going to want those because while the sweater is going to be nice on its own, I find that any garment that you make in crochet always looks better and much more polished and clean when you block it. Plus also that's your chance of being able to kind of even things out. It helps you kind of stretch open these stitches and so that you can really see that texture pop. And it helps us make sure that it matches the measurements that we want in our garment. Now that you have all of the supplies, we are ready to get started. So let's begin with the neck ribbing. To begin the Boreas pullover, we're going to start by making the collar ribbing at the neck. So to do this, I'm going to use my size B 2.25 millimeter hook and go ahead and grab my yarn here. We will start by making a slip knot, placing that on our hook. And then we are going to chain 10. Or if you want to customize it and make your collar wider or shorter, or if you want to make it like a turtleneck or something, you can adjust this as well. But in either case, once you make your chains, you're then going to kind of tighten down that last one, and you're going to half double crochet in the second chain from the hook and in each chain across. All right, I have just worked my last one, so I should now have 9 half double crochets. So I'm going to now turn and chain 1. And then to create the ribbing effect, we're going to be working in just the back loops only of our half double crochets. So I'm going to yarn over and half double crochet through just that back loop of my first half double crochet. Then I'm going to half double crochet in the back loop of every half double crochet across. So I should have a total of 9 stitches, or if you made any adjustments to the width of your collar, you'll have the same number of stitches that you created on your first row. All right, coming now to my very last stitch here. Make sure I'm getting into that back loop there. Very good, okay. And then I'm going to turn and chain 1 again, and then just repeat that row over and over. Back loop only, half double crochets across. And depending on your size, it's going to tell you to repeat this until you reach a certain number of rows. So once I get to the end here, you can see now that if we look on this opposite side, we're starting to get that nice little ribbing effect there. And that's going to continue as we make our rows. So I'm going to make up a few more rows to create my sample, and then I will meet you back to talk about how to join your ribbing. All right, I've just finished working at my little sample collar here. Obviously, yours is going to be much longer. But one of the things to test out is to make sure that if you were to join them, then this would fit over your head comfortably. It is going to need to stretch, and then it'll spring back to its normal size around the neck. This is going to be a crew neck style, so it is going to be closer to the neck. But if you do want it a little looser, you can always add a few more rows and just account for that whenever you do this next part. So what we're going to do now in order to join is we're actually going to chain 1, and then we're going to turn, because this is going to be our right side. So on our right side, we're going to see that we have this ridge along here of our last row. That is the back side of our half double crochets there that create that little V. And we're going to be using that to join on top of this dip from the first row where we worked into our chains. So if you turn your collar and fold it over like so, the ridges of our last row nestle nicely into that dip of our first row. And so that's how we can create this kind of seamless look in our collar. So to accomplish that, what we're going to do is match stitch for stitch, and we're going to insert our hook through that V, that front V, which really incidentally is just inserting it through that half double crochet like normal, but then inserting it through that first chain from our first row. So if we insert it through that first chain, it'll come out like this, and we're always inserting it through the front, so through the right side on both sides. So inserting it through the front on our last row and through this chain on the first row. Then what we'll do is we're going to yarn over and slip stitch that whole thing together. So we just pull it through everything on our hook to join them together. Then we just repeat that for each of the stitches following that. So I'll now go into my second stitch here, going through the front of it, and then finding the next chain right here. We're going to go through that one now, and then yarn over and slip stitch both of those together. If you have to, you can go through one at a time, twist it however you need to. Just go nice and slowly on this part. There's no need to rush this part. This part you want to make sure joins up really nicely and neatly. Don't make it too tight, don't make it too loose. Just do one stitch at a time. You'll eventually get it all done. So there's my third one. And since I have a total of 9, that means that I now have 6 more to go. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There should be 6 chains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that as we're moving along, my yarn is moving deeper inside. So a lot of this is just me kind of feeling for my yarn, but if I need to, I can kind of poke my hook over or out through here and then go over my yarn and then kind of pull it downward, and it'll eventually grab it so that it can go through. So that way I'm not having to keep looking back inside to try to find my yarn. All right, I've got two more. So here's this one. And then one more. A little tricky there. There we go. Got through both loops there. And then through this last chain. And there we go. Now, if we turn our collar like this, to pull my loop up a bit more so I can set my hook aside, you can see now that that joins it in a nice, mostly seamless looking way. There's maybe a slight bit more thickness to it than the other ones, but if you're just looking at this and you didn't even know it was there, you wouldn't even be able to tell. So that's a nice, neat way of joining this half double crochet ribbed collar. So now that we have our collar made, it is time for the next step, which is to begin our yoke. To do the yoke of our sweater, I'm actually going to trade out my size B hook with my size C 2.75 millimeter, because this is going to be my main hook for the remainder of the sweater. So we're going to place that hook into our loop here. And we are now ready to begin our first round. So the first round is just going to be working half double crochets into the sides of these rows of our ribbing. To do that, we are going to be following the instructions, which is that for each one of these ridges, we are going to be putting in one half double crochet, but then inside of each of these grooves, we're going to put two half double crochets. So as you can see here, each rib has kind of this like raised ridge part. That's what it's talking about when it says to place one in a ridge. And then in between those ridges, we've got these little dips that go inward. Those are our grooves. So we're going to place two into each of those. And then that, if you follow along, is going to give you the correct stitch count to start the yoke for your size. So I'm going to start by doing a chain one. Then this first ridge is basically just going to be where I kind of inserted my hook and joined earlier. So I'm just going to kind of insert my hook into there as best I can, pull up my loop, yarn over, pull through everything on my hook. Then between the ridges, I'm going to have the groove. And what I like to do is kind of note that in this groove, there's kind of two major spots. There's this one right here. So I'm going to place my first stitch in the groove here. And then there's kind of this gap right here. I could either do it here underneath this single loop, or for extra security, I like to go into the one right below it to grab two loops, just so then that way it's a little bit, stronger of a hold. So inside of each groove, I'm going to do one half double crochet in that right gap, then one half double crochet into that left gap. And then I just repeat that all the way around. So in this next ridge section, I'm going to do a half double crochet just somewhere in that ridge. Does not have to be precise, just has to be, what looks good to you. And then inside of our groove, I'm going to insert two half double crochets, one in the gap on the right, one in the gap on the left. And I'll just keep repeating that around and around until I get back to the beginning of my round. I'm coming now to the end. There's my very first stitch of the round in that first ridge, and I've got one more section where I've got a ridge and a groove. So I'm going to do one more half double crochet in this ridge, and then two more in this groove. But then Another technique that you're going to need to do is what is called the invisible join. So before I actually finish this last stitch in this groove, I'm actually going to go behind my working yarn and the first stitch of the round, and I'm going to go through the back of that stitch, going underneath that V on the top. Now this can be a bit tricky, but once you do that, you're then able to just grab the yarn by going with your hook over the yarn and then basically finish off your last stitch with that pull through. And what that does is it joins the tops of our stitches together without an extra loop that's usually caused if we just slip stitched these together. So now we've got the V of our last stitch right here. And then if I turn here, we've got the V of our first stitch right here, and there's not another thing in between them. We've got this active loop, but that's about to be used for this next part. So that's how you do the invisible join. So now to do round 2, we're actually going to be creating a nice little ridge around our collar by doing what's called a third loop only half double crochet. So to do a third loop only half double crochet, we have to first study what do I mean by a third loop. So on a half double crochet, just like any other crochet stitch, the top is going to have these V loops that are connected. But because we do that extra yarn over, it creates this third loop that's right here on the front, and that's where we're going to insert our hook to work our half double crochets. So I'm going to yarn over, go underneath that third loop, right there. There we go. So once I'm through that third loop, I'll then yarn over, pull my loop through, then yarn over and pull through all 3. And then I just do that into the next one. So I find that third loop here, yarn over, insert my hook into just that third loop. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult, but it can be done. There we go. So underneath that third loop, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. And if I keep doing that, working half double crochets into just that third loop, then the 2 loops of the V that were on top are actually going to be pushed away. So that when I flip this over, it creates this nice ridge of V's that will go around the collar. And so that just creates this nice little transition from our collar to our yoke. Now the other thing that's going to be happening as you work this round of half double crochets through the third loop is we are going to be doing our first round of increases. So when you're reading your pattern, it's going to tell you how many you're going to do, and then it's going to tell you to increase a half double crochet third loop only. So whenever it tells you to do that, all you do is just place 2 half double crochets into the third loop of whatever stitch you're about to work into. So I would just half double crochet through that third loop. Then working into the same third loop, I'm going to half double crochet again. And my increase is now placed. And then I just do that again. So it'll tell me to work a certain number of half double crochets in the third loop only. So then you just basically repeat that around over and over, increasing and then invisible joining at the end. And then we're ready to begin round 3 where we actually start our established stitch pattern. So I'm going to work the rest of this up off camera and join you to talk about how to do that. So for my sample, I've got just these 3 stitch markers. You're actually going to need 12 stitch markers to mark where for like our increasing, and then you're going to have 1 unique stitch marker to mark the end of our round. Now the reason for this is because sometimes we can get lost when we just see a bunch of the same stitch markers, and even though when we get there it'll be a little more obvious that that's the new round that we're about to join into, sometimes it just helps to have this give us a quick visual cue of, okay, I'm about to end my round, I'm ready to do my join and turn. Okay, So now that I've done my join and turn, we're going to be first putting a stitch marker in this very first stitch. So we're going to take one of these and place it in here. Then in your pattern, it's going to indicate how many you count out and then place a new stitch marker. And depending on your size, it could be any number, but whatever your number it is, you just count that many and you're going to place a stitch marker. So I'm going to do that here. Okay. Done that. And then you should have the same number of stitches remaining at the end. And then in the very last stitch here, we're going to place our end of round stitch marker. Now, if you find that you counted and it didn't quite line up, it may be that you have an incorrect stitch count, forgot to do an increase somewhere in there. That's okay. We can always fix that on this round. But for now, we're just going to say we have it all correct and we're going to go ahead and move on. So what I need to talk to you about at this point is once you place all of your stitch markers, we are going to be doing what is called a chaotic basket weave. And then we're also going to be doing a unique way of increasing our yoke. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is the chaotic basket weave. To do the chaotic basket weave, we're going to need a random number generator of some kind. I'm using a 12-sided die, or you can just use like an online random generator or any kind of tool that you want to use that has an equal chance of getting all 12 of these numbers. So what you're going to be doing with this number is this is going to be indicating how many of each type of stitch you're going to be doing. So to do a basket weave stitch, you normally would start your first row, you would do a certain number of front post half double crochets. Then you would do the same number of back post half double crochets, then front post, then back post, front post, back post, and you just keep alternating. Well, in this case, you're not going to be doing the same number of front posts and back posts each time. You're going to be working across 12 stitches at a time. So across the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way through the 12th stitch, it's going to tell you to work front post front post half double crochets across whatever number I roll here. So let's say I roll not a 12, that's going to be something different. Okay, a 10. So I roll a 10. So what that means is I would work across the first 10 stitches working front post half double crochets. But because we have a total of 12, our repeat is of 12, the last 2 stitches would get back post half double crochets. So across these 12 stitches, I would work 10 of those with front posts and then 2 of those with back posts. Then I would repeat that again. 10 stitches get front posts, 2 of them get back posts. 10 get front posts, 2 of them get back posts, and then you should end up with 10 and 2 by the end. The next thing to talk about is the increasing, and for that we're going to need a 6-sided die. So this is just a standard, cube die. You can get just regular ones with like the dots on them, or you can use a set like I have here from that I just got at Walmart. And what this is going to be telling you is where the increase point is going to be. What you're going to do is you would roll this 6-sided one, and this says 5. What that means is that we are going to actually place an increase in the 5th stitch after each stitch marker. So this stitch marker is my very first stitch of the round, but I don't count that. I'm going past it. So if I had rolled a 1, that means I would increase in the one after it. So this would be where my increase would go. If I rolled a 2, it would go here. If I rolled a 3, it would go here. But I rolled a 5, so it would be 4, 5. So I'm going to place my increase in this stitch. Then I'm going to keep working in pattern. So working my pattern for my chaotic basket weave. And then I'm going to get to this stitch marker and then I'll do that again. So after this stitch marker, we'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to be the stitch where I'll place my increase. And then I keep going and going and going and going. And then I've got this stitch marker right here. And so I will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That 5th one is going to be my increase point. And then that'll be my last one of this round because I only have 3 stitch markers. You're going to have 12, so you're going to have 12 increase points as you go around. So combine both of those together, and you've got your pattern for just this round. So in the pattern that you can purchase, I actually have a couple of ways you can track your numbers. So there's one that's compact that's for all the sizes on one page, or I do have individual ones for each of the different sizes where you can record your numbers and keep track of your rounds. So then that way you can more easily remember if you set it down later, you can be like, oh, what were my numbers again? Oh, right, I'm doing 10 and then 2, and I increase in the 5th stitch. So now that I've explained all of that, let's see it actually happen in action. So this is my very first stitch. And so I'm going to go ahead and actually remove that stitch marker just so I can work into it. And for this round, round 3, we're going to start with front posts and then end with back posts. So I'm going to find my first stitch here, and I'm going to find the post. So for these, I look for this kind of V on the front of my half double crochets. And then just to the right of that, hanging underneath there, those legs, that's going to be our post. That's what I will always work into. So if you're unsure which one you're supposed to work into, the half double crochet is always this V, and then you go around the post that's to the right of it. So to do a front post half double crochet, we're going to go yarn over, go around the front of our stitch, and go around that post. It'll be a little tight here. You're going to go around that post and try to go under that V. You're not going through that V because you don't want to go through the stitch. You want to go around the stitch. We're going to go around it right here. That. Then we're going to yarn over, pull a loop around it. Okay. And now that I have my 3 loops on my hook, I'm going to yarn over and pull through those 3. There we go. Now that's my first stitch, and that was also the stitch that had the stitch marker in it. So I'm going to go ahead and place that back into this stitch here. Okay, place it like that. There we go. There's our first stitch. So that's the first one of our 10 that we need to work front post half double crochets. So now I'm going to work this next one as a front post half double crochet. So go around the post here, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3. So there's my second one of 10. And then this is my third one to work around. So we're going to find that V, find those legs, yarn over, go around it like that, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. So I've made 3 stitches so far, but I've only gone into the second stitch past this stitch marker. So I'm not ready to increase on the 5th stitch yet. So then I just keep going. Yarn over, go around the next post here. That's the third stitch past our stitch marker. Then yarn over, go around the next one. There's our fourth one. And then yarn over. And now I'm ready to go around this 5th one. So here's where we need to put our increase point. So the increase in this case is going to be front post half double crochets. So what that means is that I'm going to work 2 front post half double crochets around this post instead of just 1. But I'm still only counting it as the 6th stitch that I've worked around because we're working across 12 stitches. We're not making 12 stitches because we'll be increasing at random points. So I can't count those. I'm just counting the stitches I'm working around. So I'm going to count this as my 5th stitch past my stitch marker. So I'll go ahead and work 1 front post half double crochet, then yarn over, go around that post again, like so. Usually I go underneath the stitch that I just made. There we go. Yarn over, pull through, and then that stitch now has 2 front post half double crochets worked around it. But if I count, we've only worked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these stitches of the 10 that I need to work. So I still have 4 more front post half double crochets to work. So I'll yarn over, go around this next one, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that I've done that, I have worked across 10 stitches using front post half double crochets, and I increased in the 5th stitch past my stitch marker. Then, to complete my 12 stitch repeat here, I'm going to yarn over and now do 2 back post half double crochets. So to do a back post half double crochet, instead of going through the front around this post, we're going to yarn over and go behind our work, come through the back, and then turn our hook, go around the post to the back again. And it's going to wrap around that post still. And then we're going to yarn over, pull a loop around it. And there we go. Then we'll yarn over, pull through 3, and then I do that again in the next one. So look here, we've got this V right here. And we're like, where's the post I'm supposed to work around? It's kind of tucked in here. If you need to, just kind of grab that stitch and kind of stretch it up, and it'll make the legs pop out right there. Those are the legs. So that's going to be where we work our back post half double crochet. So we will yarn over, come to the back, go around those legs, making sure we're not going through the stitch, then pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. So all told, we have worked 13 stitches because we did an increase. But we worked across 12 stitches. So that's still what we need to be doing, is working across 12. So we worked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stitches, 11, 12. Front posts in the first 10, back posts in the last 2. And then we also worked our increase at the 5th stitch past the stitch marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We worked that increase right there. And now we're ready to repeat. Whew! I know that's quite a lot to keep track of. I understand. But once you actually start working this pattern, you do kind of get the hang of it. I'll even kind of show you, I've got my example one right here. This, I got kind of used to it up here, and then now I don't have to think about this. And especially once you get more spread out between your stitch markers, there's a lot less of this, having to increase and remember the increasing and the repeating of 12 and things like that. So, just go slowly at this part and you'll do just fine. So now I'm ready to repeat across the next 12 stitches. Notice it doesn't align perfectly with this stitch marker, and that's okay. It's not supposed to, because the stitch markers are just going to keep moving as we increasing, and there's not always going to be exactly a multiple of 12 in between each one. But because there are 12 increase points, we are going to have an even multiple of 12 all the way around. So it should work out if you just trust the process here. Okay, so this next stitch here is the one that's not marked. So that one is not this one. So this one's the one we're working around. So that's going to be our first of our 10 that we need to work front posts around. So we'll yarn over, go around that post. There's 1. And then this next marker, I'm going to take out and then work my second one around this one. There's 2. And then I'll go ahead and place my stitch marker back in there. And then the next one I work around is kind of right next to it, because this was actually where we increased on the previous round. So there are both stitches in here. So you've just got to make sure you're grabbing around the post of this one. So we're going to yarn over, go around that post like that, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. So that's my third stitch that I've worked a front post half double crochet. But now we're starting to count past our stitch marker. So this was the first stitch past the stitch marker, and we need to make sure we're working our 5th one. So I keep going. So there's 3, 4, 5, but only 3 stitches past so far. So then I do 6, That's 4 stitches past. And then I do 7. Okay, so the 7 is the 5th stitch past this stitch marker. On the previous one, it was 6. It was the 6th stitch. So it's shifted over by 1. So if you're like, okay, if I'm following any kind of like, pattern in the numbers or whatever, that can kind of help you like be like, okay, did I place this in the right one? If you're like, that's totally confusing, I don't want to deal with that, then don't worry about that. Just count, hey, there's 5 stitches past the stitch marker, do an increase in this one. So I'll go ahead and do my increase around this half double crochet, and I'm done with that one. But I remember that that's still only the 7th stitch I've worked a front post around. So it's 2 stitches, but it's only the 7th stitch I've worked around. So then I still have 3 more front post stitches to work. So yarn over, find this next one right here, go around it. So there's number 8. Then I go again, number 9, and then number 10. And now I need to work 2 stitches in back post half double crochets. So I will yarn over, go behind here, and there we go. Back post half double crochet around the next 2. And that's all I do to continue around, is I'll work across 10 stitches doing front posts, 2 stitches doing back posts, and when I go past a stitch marker, I just increase in the 5th one past that stitch marker. Now the reason for these dice randomizing is because we want to get the basket weave to not line up perfectly. We want it to be kind of random to create that very interesting texture where you'll get a unique pattern that will be different from anybody else's, even though they're following technically the same pattern that you are. The other reason that we want a different one for the increase points is because if you've ever made anything in the round in crochet, if you increase at the same place every single time, when you get out big enough, you actually wind up not creating a circle. You end up creating a polygon of whatever number of increases that you did. So in this case, I'd have 12 increases, so I'd be creating a 12-sided figure. It wouldn't be a perfect circle. So then some people will go ahead and maybe shift over by 1. They're like, okay, well, every time I increase, I'll just increase in the one after that or the one before it or something like that, just to kind of keep moving it. But then instead of a 12-sided figure, I'd wind up getting a 12-sided spiral. So those increase points would be very obvious as they spiral. So when I randomize it, what that does is it moves the increase points as the pattern grows out. So it's not a perfectly straight line of increases, and it's not a perfect spiral of increases. It's kind of a jagged line of increases. So that jagged line of increases helps make it round out a lot better. So that's a technique when you're working round yoke sweaters with crochet, is just to kind of randomly move where your increase points are. Now, the thing is, when you do move them, you do still want them to be equally distant from each other, because otherwise, if you try to put too many increases on one side and then spread them out too far on the other, you get some kind of wonky shape. We still need it to be evenly around. So that's why we established 5 at the beginning. So that way you know it's 5 after every single stitch marker, so they all shifted by the same number. So then if I go the next time and I roll a 4, then they're all going to shift over to that 4th position. Roll again, it'll be a 2, they'll shift over to that 2nd position. I roll again, and then I get like a, let's say I get a 6, then they'll shift back over to the 6th position. So it's moving over around and around. Anyway, that's just my justification for why you're using this die to move those increase points. So there we go. Now that you know that, I'm going to finish out this round here, and then I'll meet you back to talk to you about how to do round 4. Okay, I've worked my way around, and I'm about to work my final back post half double crochet around this last stitch, because that's my end of round stitch marker. So I'll go ahead and take that out. And then I'm going to just go around the back here and go in, and then I will complete the stitch. So we will not be doing the invisible join on these post stitches. I found that it was a little too difficult doing the invisible join and then trying to work around posts. And plus also it didn't really make much of a difference. So to me, I was like, it's not really worth it. So instead, what we're going to do is just join with the normal slip stitch into the top of our stitch here. So my stitch marker went through more than the 2 loops of our top here. I'm just going to go and remove that and then put that through here, through the top. Oop, need to go under my yarn here. There we go. And then we'll just slip stitch to join. Now I'll go ahead and put that stitch marker back in that first stitch where it needs to stay. There we go. Okay. So now that I've done that, we're going to turn our work. And then now we're ready to work on the wrong side here. And what's great about the wrong side is that you don't have to worry about any kind of increasing. We're not increasing on these wrong side rounds, only on the right side ones. And you're just going to basically match what you see. So here, this very last stitch I worked was a back post half double crochet. So when I turn it to the wrong side, it's actually popping out what looks like towards the front. And that's exactly what we're going to work, is a front post half double crochet to match that there. So I'm going to yarn over, go around the post of this stitch through the front, and that creates my first stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and place my stitch marker back in here. And then around the next stitch, it looks like it's popping to the front, so that's going to be another front post half double crochet. And then same thing with these next 2 front posts. But then when I get to these next stitches, these ones are not to the front. They've got this kind of ridge right here in front of them. That indicates that they were front posts on the right side. So now that means they're back posts here on the wrong side. So I'm going to yarn over, go to the back, come around that post. And again, if you need to kind of stretch that stitch to find that post, you can. And then pull up my loop. Oop, got away from me there. There we go. Oh, yeah, sometimes the back posts can be a little tricky. Just got to be kind of patient with them until you get used to it. There we go. Okay, I pulled it up and then created my stitch there. And then I'll keep going, doing these back posts, half double crochets here. Now I'm here to where I have this increase point. So anytime there was an increase, that means that our posts are wrapped around the same one, so they can be a little squished together. So you've got to make sure you're working around each one of those so that you don't decrease your stitch count back down. So we're going to yarn over. I'm going to locate this first stitch right here and find that its post is right here because it's slightly to the right. And so I'm going to yarn over and go around just that post. There we go. All right, and then finish my stitch. And then the next one is going to be this one that was right here. So the right of that is where that post is. I'm going to yarn over, go to the right here, going underneath that part of that stitch that was to the right, go around the post, pull up a loop, and then complete my stitch. And then I've made sure I've worked back post half double crochets around both of those stitches. And then I just keep going. So these are all back posts across here, and that would make sense because there were a lot of front posts. We worked across 10 stitches with front post half double crochets. So on the wrong side, we're going to have a lot more back post half double crochets than we do front post ones. There we go. And then when we get to the stitch marked stitches, we just remove them, work it, and then place the stitch marker back in. So I'll get to that to show you here. Okay, there's our marked stitch. Take that out. Do our back post. Place it back in. And find our next stitch, which is, okay. So this is another thing, is that sometimes you're like, wait, which one did I just work around? So if you kind of follow the line of your stitch here, it's wrapping around right here. So that means this stitch right here was the one that we just worked around right here, since it's to the right of that. So we're skipping that one. We're going to this one now. So we're going to work around this post right here. That's our next one. There we go. And then I just keep going until I get to my next front post one. So these next two are going to be front post half double crochets. And then you just keep repeating that all the way around until you get to the very end where you're going to slip stitch to join and then turn. So I'm going to go ahead and work mine up, and then I'll meet you back to talk to you about the next round. There we go. And then what I'll do is go ahead and slip stitch into this very first stitch to join. And then I'll go ahead and turn. And now I've got my right side to work. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my dice. And what I would do is I would roll them. I'm going to roll them deliberately. So let's say I roll a 4 on this first one, and then I roll a 2 on this one. Okay, so what this means is that for this round, we're going to work our first set of stitches. We're going to do 4 of them, and then the remaining 8 stitches we'll do the opposite. And this one means we'll work an increase in the second stitch past each stitch marker. So this very first stitch is our first stitch of the round. Now to make a basket weave, we alternate between starting our round with front post and back post. So right now we started the first rounds with front post half double crochets. So we're going to do the opposite. So now we're going to start this round with 4 back post half double crochets. So I'm going to yarn over, go behind my stitch, go around that post, going around the back, pull up my loop, then yarn over, pull through all 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark that. And then I need to work across 3 more stitches using back posts. But I also need to remember that I need to increase in the second stitch past our stitch marker. So I'm going to go second back post stitch. And then this next one is the second one past our stitch marker, and it's the third stitch I'm working back post half double crochets. So I'll yarn over, go around the back here. There we go. And then pull up a loop. Then go around the back, going under the stitch I just worked. And then go around that post that second time. Pull up my loop. Oop, I messed up. Take your time on this one, just like with any of the other back post ones. Sometimes it helps if you kind of turn it towards you and you can kind of see your work there. There we go. I pulled it through and then I complete it. So now that I've done my increase in the second stitch past our stitch marker, I'm going to continue with my 4 stitch pattern. So I've worked 1, 2, 3 stitches with back posts. So I need to work 1 more. I know I'm working 5 stitches, but again, this is about how many you work across, not the number of stitches you create. Then we pull up that 4th post stitch in the back, and now I switch to working in the front. So I'm going to yarn over, go around the front of these, and notice that we match the ones that we're working, but that's okay because we worked front posts across 10 last time, and this time we're working only back posts across 4, so some of them is going to be overlapped, and that's what we want to go for. So now I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, and then my 8th one is coming to a back post stitch, so it's going to create that kind of basket weave look, but only across this one stitch. And there we go. Front post, half double crochet. And now I just repeat. I'm going to work back posts across the next 4 stitches. So there's 1, And then we've got this second one right here. It's actually going to create that alternating effect. So it's going to create the real basket weave effect right there. It's going to create kind of like a little mess right there, but that's okay. Gives us some nice fun texture. And now we've reached our stitch marked stitch. So I'll take it out and work my next back post half double crochet. So that's the third one. And then I'm going to put the stitch marker back in. And then I'll work my fourth one. So my fourth one is going to be right around here. And now I'm about to start working my front post half double crochets. But notice that this next stitch is the second stitch past our stitch marker. So that's going to be where I place my increase. But unlike this first time where I did an increase using back post stitches, this time I'm going to do the increase using front post stitches. So that's another thing I wanted to point out, is that sometimes you're going to alternate working back post increases and front post increases just depending on where they line up in your 12 stitch repeat here. So that counts as just my first one of my front posts, but it's my first, like the increase past our stitch marker. So then I work a second one here. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then I would repeat that again, working 4 in the back post, 8 in front posts, increasing at that second one past the stitch marker. So after this, the rest pretty much is about the same. So you're going to basically continue working, alternating back posts and front posts on this round. Then when you get to the next round, you just repeat what we did in the previous one, where you just match stitch for stitch. So anything that looks like it's towards the front, you do a front post half double crochet. Anything towards the back, you do a back post half double crochet. Now there's only one exception to what this is, and that's if you were to roll a 12 on this 12-sided die. So rather than working all front posts or all back posts, what we're actually going to do when you roll a 12 is just work a round of regular half double crochets and making sure you're still increasing in the same ones. So if you rolled like a 2, making sure you're increasing in the second stitch after each of the stitch markers, just working regular the half double crochets. And then what you're going to do is on the wrong side, you're going to work like we did in this very first set of rounds here, where we're going to work the third loop only in each stitch. So I had one instance where I did work I did roll a 12, and it was actually fairly early on, and I believe it was somewhere around, I think it was this round right here. Okay, so right here you can see I've got this ridge going all the way across. That was where I rolled a 12. So all this really does is it kind of creates almost like a little reset round where it kind of frames each one of these, but it's really not super obvious. But it does make it to where instead of just all front posts or all back posts, you get to kind of change it up a little bit. So 12 is kind of like, we get to kind of reset and do something a little bit different. So there you go. So now you have all the information you need to be able to continue to work your yoke, working the chaotic basket weave pattern, increasing, and so on and so forth. I just wanted to take a moment at this point to talk to you about the mistakes that you are undoubtedly going to be making, because I know that for myself, even though I tried to be very, very careful as I worked, I definitely made all kinds of mistakes in this. I've done some miscounting. I've forgotten to do an increase. I put increases in some of the wrong places. I've had to do a couple of random increases and decreases just to kind of get this to fix. I would forget to do the right number of front posts or back posts. But in the end, that's what's so great about this pattern, is how forgiving it actually is. So if you'll actually note, anywhere in here, you're not going to be able to immediately pick out where all my errors are. So even me, if I were to try to go in and try to look specifically for my mistakes, I wouldn't know if something was a mistake or if it's just part of the chaotic basket weave pattern, or if that's where an increase was supposed to go or not supposed to go. But that's not going to be worth my time to do, and it's definitely not going to be anybody else's. So if you find that you are struggling and feeling like you just keep making mistake after mistake, don't stress about that. Just keep going. make sure that by the end of the yoke and by the end of your rounds, every once in a while, just count and make sure, do you have the right stitch count? If you're off by a couple of stitches, just fix it. If you're not, then you're good. Keep going. Just take random opportunities to just double check your work and just make sure you have the right total number of stitches, even if the individual repeats and patterns don't exactly match up with what they're supposed to be. It's supposed to be chaotic anyway. So if you just feel like you're doing it wrong, you're absolutely not. Keep going. You're doing a great job. So with that, I'm not at all done with this yoke. As you can see, it's way too small. So I'm going to continue working mine up. I just wanted to give you those words of encouragement because I know at this point for me, I did get some frustration and I wanted to make sure you weren't as frustrated. All right, so I'm going to keep working mine and then I will meet you back when I'm ready to split for the sleeves and the body. All right, many hours later and lots of stitching. I am now finished working my yoke. And one thing that I made sure to do was I put this on over my neck and made sure that it kind of fit where I wanted it to. It met right about where I wanted my underarm to be. So I know that this is going to fit. If you find that you need a little bit of extra room or maybe a few more rounds, feel free to work a few more in this pattern. And then you should be ready to do this next part. So this next part is going to be splitting. So instead of working one continuous round for our yoke going around the shoulders, we're actually going to be splitting to where we will work only the body stitches and we will skip the sleeve stitches and work those later. To do that, this pattern is going to indicate the number of stitches that you will work before you will actually skip the stitches for your sleeve. So what I like to do ahead of time is go ahead and count out the number of stitches that I'm going to work and then mark with a stitch marker the first stitch of the sleeve that I'm going to skip. Then I continue to work around and count out the number of stitches I'm going to skip for my sleeve and then mark the last stitch of the sleeve. So that way, the first and last stitch of our sleeves are marked, and I know exactly where I'm going to split and skip for this sleeve opening. Once I do that, I then count out the number of stitches that will work across the front. That's going to be the longest stretch of stitches in this round. And then find that I will then skip for the other sleeve. So this is going to be the first stitch of the next sleeve. And you'll count out the same number of stitches you did for the other sleeve and mark that last stitch. And then that marks the front and the first and last stitch of the skipped sleeve section. Then the last thing you'll do is just to confirm, you'll count out until the end, which should be the same number as what you counted at the beginning because you're basically doing the second half of the back of our sweater. So you do the first half of the back, you skip to make a sleeve, do the front part across the chest, skip to make the next sleeve, and then you do the second half of the back, and then you're back at the beginning. So now that we know the structure of how we're going to do the split, let's actually see it in action. So what we're going to do is in our first round here, we are going to actually just work regular half double crochets. So rather than doing the front post, back post, we're just going to do regular half double crochets through both loops of our stitches. So I'm going under both loops and creating my first half double crochet. I'm going to go ahead and mark that first stitch with my stitch marker here. And then if you'll also notice, all the stitch markers for the increase points have been removed because we're no longer doing those increases and we're done with the yoke part. So I just took those out since I only needed the ones marking my skips. All right, now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and work a half double crochet in every stitch until I reach that first stitch marker. So I'm going to go ahead and work that up off camera, and then I will meet you back to show you how to do the split across the sleeve. Okay, I've got this last one that I'm working. And now since this marks the first stitch of my sleeve, I'm actually going to be skipping that one. So depending on your size, it's going to tell you to make a certain number of chains. So this is the underarm chain, and this is just going to determine the length under the arm, of course, and it's going to be the distance between the front section of the chest and the back section of the chest. So this is the part where you can actually customize how wide that you want this part to be. And if you want it to be like, wider and everything like that, just do a longer chain. You want it a little bit shorter, a little bit tighter around the chest, then you can always shorten the underarm chain as well. The important thing is to make sure that you're just getting it to fit the way that you want it to. So for me, I'm just going to go ahead and follow the instructions for my size, and I'm going to chain 18. Okay. Then once I chain 18, I'm then going to skip all of these stitches for my sleeve and begin working in the next stitch after this marked stitch, because I wanted to make sure I marked the last stitch of my sleeve. So in this next stitch, I'm going to work another half double crochet. Now, because I am skipping and I've just done a chain, there's really not a whole lot of structure. So I've got to make sure I'm pulling this chain nice and close, so that when I make my next stitch, it's not going to be all stretched out and loopy. So if I just tried to make my half double crochet way back here, I'll do my yarn over and I'll insert and try to pull. There's all that space, and then it's just not going to be a very good looking stitch. So what I do is make sure to bring my chain nice and close, and then I will yarn over and then insert my hook into this stitch, keeping everything nice and close, and then yarn over, pull up a loop, keeping it nice and close still, and then yarn over and pull through all three loops on my hook. And we can see that that half double crochet is much better, much closer, much tighter, so it's not going to have this big, large gap. And after that, I just continue working half double crochets into every stitch around until I reach the next underarm stitch marker. Sorry, the next stitch marker marking where I need to do my underarm chain. And then I'll skip across the sleeves and then work to the end. So that part is literally exactly the same as what we just did. You're just half double crocheting around. Once you get to the next section of sleeve, you'll just chain however many you need to, skip the sleeve stitches, rejoin with a half double crochet, and then keep working around. So I'm going to work this up off camera, and then I'll meet you back to talk to you about the next round. All right, I'm now coming to my final stitches of my first split round. And then what we're going to be doing is in this last stitch, we're going to be doing our invisible join. Since now we're no longer going to be working our post stitches, we will actually be switching back to doing the invisible join when we join our rounds. So as a reminder, the invisible join, you will work your final stitch up until you need to do your final yarn over and pull through. So for my half double crochet, I am now ready to pull through my final stitch. But before you do that, you're going to find the first stitch of the round, and you're going to insert your hook behind everything through the back of that stitch, yarn under your hook and grab and pull it through everything that's on your hook. And that will simultaneously complete your last stitch, but then also invisibly join it to your first stitch. So that's the end of our first split round. For our second split round, we're going to turn our work. And then this time, instead of working through both loops, we're going to work through this third loop like we did when we would do our, like if you rolled a 12, or what we did here when we transitioned from the collar to the yoke. So this is just transitioning from the yoke to our body and sleeves. So it's going to give it that nice clean line of V's like we did up by the collar. So to remind you how to do that, we're just going to yarn over. And then this third loop is this one that's right here in the middle. When we look at our stitch from the front here, and then we just go underneath just that front third loop here, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, complete our half double crochet, and that pushes the V of the top of our stitch to the front. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and mark my first stitch of this round. And then I'm just going to work half double crochets in the third loop only of every stitch, all the way until I reach my underarm chain. I'm going to go ahead and work in half double crochet third loop only, and then meet you back up to talk about working across the underarm chain. Okay, I've just now worked across in third loop only, and I've got here one more half double crochet before it begins my chains. So I'm going to go ahead and work a third loop only half double crochet in this final one. And then what we're going to do is just work half double crochets across these chains. So what you're going to try to do is aim for the same number of half double crochets as you had chains under the arm until you get all the way across here to our first half double crochet. So if we kind of turn or work this way, we can see how our last half double crochet that was worked is this one that's right here with these legs. And if we follow it up, we can see that it was completed by doing this loop that's right here. But that loop is not actually the top of this stitch. It's in fact actually just the spare loop we would have had if we had an active loop while we're working. That's not the top of our stitch. It's actually this one right here. So this is actually our final half double crochet right here. So then if I turn my work back around, we can see if I pull my hook back out where it was, the third loop for that one is going to be right here. So this is going to be the first half double crochet where I will begin working third loop only again. But then anything before that is just going to be worked as a regular chain. So to put that all together, because I worked 18 chains on my underarm, I'm just going to work 18 half double crochets, putting one in every chain. So I'll yarn over, and then I can kind of like turn this chain however I need to. It doesn't really matter which part of the chain you work into. I'm just going to kind of insert. Let's go into, since I don't want it to be the back bumps, let's turn it kind of this way. I'll work into this chain right there. So there's my first chain. So there's stitch number 1, then 2, 3, 16, 17, and 18 in my last chain there. And then I'm ready to continue working third loop half double crochets. So I'm here on this first stitch, just going into that third loop, creating my half double crochet, then continuing to work third loop half double crochets around, and then I will reach the other underarm chain where I will do exactly the same thing that I did here. Then once I do that, I will just simply work third loop only half double crochet to the end, invisible join, and then turn, and then I will be ready to begin the next part of my sweater, which is the body. To do the body, we're actually going to be splitting it into 2 different parts. And in the pattern, it also provides 2 separate sets of instructions. So for body part 1, what we're going to be addressing is the ballooning issue. So we did work this entire yoke in a completely different pattern than we are the rest of the body. These are done with front post and front post and back post half double crochets, but the body and sleeves are going to be worked with regular half double crochets. The gauges on these 2 sections are going to be very different when it comes to the width. So when we start returning to half double crochets, that actually is going to go wider, and that's going to create this balloon effect that's just not very like flattering or stylish on a sweater. So what I'm going to be doing is cinching it in by doing in this first part some decreases on the underarm sections. So to do that part, we are going to work, and depending on your size, it's going to say to work until you have a certain number of stitches before the underarm. Sorry, my yarn got twisted around my stitch marker there. So in this case, I'm going to work until, for my size, 6 stitches before the underarm. Now this can be approximate. It doesn't have to be exact. Just as long as you get around the same area, this should be just fine. But I can see where I have my underarm chain beginning is right about here. So I'm going to say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. So I've got 2 more stitches to work regular half double crochets. Then what I'm going to do is work half double crochet decreases across the next 6 stitches. So it's going to decrease it from 6 down to 3. So if yours is, work to the last 4 and then decrease, you're going to go from 4 to 2. If you do 8, it's going to go from 8 to 4. So it's essentially just cutting this section in half. So to do a half double crochet decrease, what we're going to do is yarn over, and then we're going to insert our hook into the front loop. So not the third loop, the front loop of our next half double crochet. So our back loop is the one farthest away. Third loop is this one that's in the front. And then this front loop is the one that's just closest to us between those two. So we'll insert our hook into that front loop. Then before we yarn over, we're going to insert it into both loops of the next half double crochet. So it's going through 2 stitches at once. This first one through just the front loop and this next one through both loops. Then we'll yarn over and pull through both of those stitches like so. And then we'll complete our stitch by yarning over and pulling through all 3. And what that does is it creates a more invisible decrease than if I were to try to do 2 half double crochets together, like you might see in some other patterns. This just kind of keeps it from being too wide and gappy and like you've got like too many stitches kind of trying to go here at once. And the top of the stitch is the same width as the tops of the other stitches. Whereas if you do 2 half double crochets together, a lot of times I find that the top can be a bit too wide and stretched compared to the other regular ones. So once I do that decrease, I then yarn over and do a decrease across the next 2. So I'll go through just that front loop and through both loops of the stitch after that. Yarn over, pull through both of those stitches. And there we go. Then yarn over, pull through all 3. My second decrease is done, and then I have one more to do across these next 2. So yarn over, go into the front loop, then into both loops of this stitch, pull a loop through both of those stitches, yarn over, pull through all 3. And now that those decreases are done, I'll simply work half double crochets into all the stitches across the underarm, no decreasing across here. Until you get all the way across the underarm to the opposite side, where you then repeat the same instructions that you did at the beginning of this underarm section. So once I reach kind of where this end of the underarm happens, again, it does not have to be exact, just as long as it's approximately close to the end of the underarm, I will then work decreases across the same number of stitches that I did over on this side. And again, that's going to be dependent on your size. Make sure you're following along with your pattern, and you'll know exactly how many you're going to need to decrease. So again, I'm going to decrease across 6 for mine. So it's going to go from 6 down to 3. So I'll yarn over, go through the front loop of this next stitch and both loops of the one after that, pull up a loop through both of those stitches, yarn over, pull through 3, and then do it again across the next 2. And then one more time across the next 2. Once I do that, I'm able to continue working the rest of the round in just regular half double crochets until I get to the other underarm, where I will literally just repeat exactly what I did here. Once you do that, you're then going to do another round where you just do regular half double crochets, and then you're going to do that again with like the underarm decreasing, and you'll just follow however many decreases you need to do for your size. And what that'll do is it'll cinch it in to where the regular half double crochets will start to match the chest width of the body of the yoke. So that means that it should still fit around the chest nice and perfectly. And that's all there really is to body part 1. So I'm going to go ahead and work this part up, and then I will talk to you about how to work body part 2. The great thing about working the body part 2 is that it is the easiest part of this entire sweater, because all it is just half double crochet, join, half double crochet around, join, half double crochet around, join, and you just keep doing that back and forth until you get the length of the body that you want. You can follow the recommended number of rounds to get the standard body length in the pattern, or this is a great place to customize where you can adjust the length of your sweater. You can make it shorter, like if you have a shorter torso, you can make it longer for a longer torso or anything like that. So that part is going to be the same no matter the size, no matter anything like that. But there is going to be one thing that you'll need to decide, and that is the shaping and whether or not you want it to be a straight waist sweater or if you want it to be a tapered waist sweater. So the straight waist, you're just going to continue working half double crochets back and forth, just like normal. Like you're not going to do any sort of like increasing, decreasing, anything like that. But if you want the tapered waist where it narrows in at the waist to give you a more like tapered silhouette, you're going to want to do some decreases along the sides. Now these are going to be different from the decreases we did to try to keep that ballooning effect out. This time, instead of doing them on the sides of the underarms, we're going to do them directly in the underarms themselves. So what you're going to do is grab 2 stitch markers, and underneath each underarm, you're going to find roughly where the center is located. So this is not going to be exact because there is an even number of stitches across, but if you just eyeball it, you can find a center stitch to just mark with your with your stitch marker. Then with your second one, you just do that on the opposite side under the other underarm. And then what it's going to tell you in your pattern is that there's going to be a certain number of rounds that you'll work without any kind of decreasing. But then on the decrease rounds, you're going to work a decrease right around this stitch marker. So I'm not doing a tapered waist for mine. So I'm just going to be doing a regular straight waist, but I do want to demonstrate here as an example. So I'm just going to kind of work some half double crochets across to show you what to do on a decrease round if you're doing the tapered waist. Okay, so what you would do is you would work until 2 stitches before your stitch marker. So I've worked until I have 2 stitches remaining before my stitch marker. Then all you do is just work a decrease like we did when we shaped the underarm earlier, but this time it's just across these 2 stitches. So we're going to yarn over, go through that front loop of this next stitch. I can get it in there. It's a little thin and close together. There we go. And then through both loops of the next stitch. Yarn over, pull through both of those. Yarn over, pull through all 3. That's your first decrease. Then in the next stitch, you're just going to work a regular half double crochet, since this is going to continue to be the center stitch. So I'll just work a half double crochet there. And then make sure to place my stitch marker back into that stitch so I know where it is for my next time that I need to decrease here. And now on the opposite side, we're going to do one more decrease across the next 2 stitches. So we'll yarn over, go through the front loop, and then through both loops of the next stitch. Yarn over, pull through both of those, yarn over, pull through all 3. And then now my decreases are done on either side of the stitch marker. And then I'm able to just continue working half double crochets like normal into every stitch across. So then you would just follow the suggested pattern in how many times you need to decrease and how often you need to decrease to give you that gradual taper. If you want a more aggressive taper, you can always add in more increased rounds, spread out evenly. If you want a more gentle taper, you don't want to taper it in as much, you can spread out some decreases and get rid of some decreased rounds. So that's really up to you how you want to shape it. So now that you know how to do that, you're now equipped to be able to work the next longest part, which is going to be the entire body. And I'm going to work my body up, and then I'm going to meet you back to talk to you about the next section, which is going to be the ribbing and the cuffs. I have now finished working up the body of my sweater, so I am ready to begin the ribbing along the bottom, which incidentally is also how we're going to do the ribbing along the sleeves. So if you're seeing this the first time, then we're working on the bottom of the body. If you're coming back to watch this for the sleeves, it's the exact same techniques. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and switch to our smaller hook if you were using this for the tighter ribbing. If you were just continuing to use the regular sized hook for what you've been doing so far, you can continue to use that. But I've gone ahead and switched here, and it's going to tell you to make sure you start on the right side here, and you're going to chain a certain number of chains depending on how long you want that bottom ribbing or the cuff to be. So I'm just going to go with what the pattern says. Once you make your chain, you are then going to skip that first chain from the hook, and in the second chain you're going to do a half double crochet. And then you're going to half double crochet into every chain across until you get back to the edge of your garment. You may notice that this is exactly the same way we started off the ribbing for our neck, and that's true. Like, this is exactly the same thing. The only difference is going to be in that we will be doing a join as you go style of ribbing. So there's going to be one extra thing to do once we get to the edge. Okay, I'm working my last half double crochet along this chain. And now I'll be back to the half double crochets that are along the edge here. So what I'm going to do is along these next 3 half double crochets, I'm going to just slip stitch along the edge to join this ribbing to the edge of my work. So in this first one, I'm going to insert, yarn over, and just pull my yarn through everything on the hook. Then into the next one, do the same thing. Just slip stitch. And then in the third one, do the same thing. Slip stitch. Then what I'm going to do is turn my work, and I will skip those slip stitches that are along the edge. So those first 3 I'm going to skip, and in that next one, that's going to be the first half double crochet. I'm going to work a half double crochet in that back loop only. So I'll go ahead and yarn over, insert through just that back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3, and that connects that first half double crochet to the edge here. And the reason we do 3 slip stitches is because we're going to be going down and then we'll be going back. So that's going to be 2 rows of half double crochets, and 2 rows of half double crochets equals about 3 stitches along here, because a crochet or a half double crochet is about 1.5 times the height of a single crochet stitch. But anyway, we're going to just half double crochet in the back loops only, just like we did with the neck ribbing, all the way down. And then once we work our final half double crochet in that back loop, we'll be at the end here. We'll simply turn and chain 1, and then work our next row the same way we just worked this one, working half double crochets in the back loop only. Then, once we get back to the edge, we're going to find that we have now reached those slip stitched stitches, and we're ready to join the top of this row to the next 3 stitches along here. So not in this one that's already been slip stitched. We'll find these next 3 that are right here, and we're going to slip stitch into those along the edge, and you just repeat those 2 rows over and over and over and over again until you get all the way around your bottom for your bottom ribbing, or all the way around the edge of the sleeve. I've obviously got quite a bit of work ahead of me, so I'm going to go ahead and work that off camera, and I'll join you back to show you how to finish the ribbing when we get all the way back around. I have now made it almost all the way around here, and I wanted to talk a bit about how to deal with this ending part. So for me, I still have, it looks like 5 more stitches left along the edge. So what I would end up doing is I would do my next 3 and then do my rows back and forth. And then I would have 2 left. So if you have something that's not 3, such as 4 or 2, you're not going to be able to do 3 slip stitches along the edge, but that's okay. So let's pretend that I only have these 4. What you would then do is just slip stitch into these next 2 instead of these next 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Pretend that I don't have that stitch there. You would just slip stitch into those next 2. Then you would turn and work your 2 rows back and forth. Then you'll work slip stitches into those last 2. And so if you end up with 2 left, that's exactly what you're going to do here. You're just going to slip stitch into those last 2. Followed by working 1 more pass of ribbing, 1 row down, 1 row back. Then once you have those last 2 ribbing rows completed, you'll be back around to the very beginning. So now we are ready to actually join these 2 sides together. Now how we're going to join these is going to be exactly the same as when we joined the ribbing on the neck when we first opened it, but we're going to have to start differently. So here we're going to have to join a slip stitch into this very first stitch of the edge here, just to kind of give us a starting point. So we're not really going to be going through anything quite yet, but we're just going to kind of slip stitch into there. And you can make that nice and tight because we're not going to be working into it later. And then what we'll do is we're going to line up this last row of ribbing on top of this first row of ribbing, these free chain loops that were right here, so that we can join them together like we did with the neck, going through the back, or sorry, through the last row, through the front of it, sorry, and then through the front of this first row as well at the same time. So if I locate here, we can see the V of our very first stitch here. That's going to be the first stitch that I will insert my hook through. So I'm going to go through this first stitch going under both loops of that V through the front. Then I'm also going to locate this first chain from this first row right about here, and I'm going to insert my hook through the front of that one as well, just like so. So now that my hook is through the front of both this stitch and this free loop of that first chain, I'm able to yarn over and slip stitch through everything that's on the hook, joining that first row and last row together. I then do that again into the next stitch. So I find my next stitch, which is going to be right here. Insert my hook into that stitch. Find the next chain along here. Insert my hook through that chain. Yarn over, grab my yarn, and pull it through everything, slip stitching it all together. And then just like with the neck, just go very slowly with this. So just 1 stitch at a time. Don't worry too much about like all the other ones. Try to keep it as aligned as you can. If you're not sure if you've already worked into a stitch, kind of follow the path of your yarn here. You can see here that if I kind of tug it, I see that it's pulling right here. So it's already through this stitch, this loop right there. So I know that I need to go to the one next to that right here. So I'll insert my hook through that one and then pull. And you're going to try to align each stitch and each chain perfectly as best you can. But if you wind up being off by 1 or 2 stitches, it's really not a big deal. As long as it looks pretty lined up when you're done, that's what really matters. But if you find that you're unhappy with it or it doesn't look very well lined, then you can always, of course, frog it. So rip back and then redo it again, making sure to align as best you can. Just go slowly with this part. Just take your time to make it look really nice and clean and joined together. And you just do that all the way until the end. Then once you reach those last few stitches there, just slip stitch them together. So I've got one more here. One, just kind of like right there. There we go. We can see that now our ribbing is joined really nicely and it continues that little ridge pattern. And it's barely noticeable that that's a seam. So once I'm happy with it, I can go ahead and fasten off, pull my yarn through, and then later I'll just weave that end in when I do all my end weavings, and my ribbing is now done. When you get to the sleeve and you work the collar, or sorry, the cuffs of your sleeve, it's going to be the exact same. So if you need to, come back to this part and rewatch this if you need help with being able to work the seam when you end your cuff on your sleeve. But otherwise, I'm done with my bottom ribbing and I'm ready to move on to the actual sleeves. When you work your sleeves, it doesn't really matter which one you start with. They're both going to be worked the exact same way. So whether you start with your right sleeve, left sleeve, it doesn't matter. You're just going to start one and then you'll repeat everything on the other sleeve. So the first thing you'll do is find your sleeve opening here. So that's going to be where we split our yoke and then did our chain across. As you can see, I kept my stitch markers here to indicate where my first and last stitches were of the skipped ones. And then I've also got my ridge of chains right here that I'm going to be working into. So for this, I'm going to be switching back to my C hook, my 2.75 millimeter, because the sleeve is going to be worked with the same size stitching as the body. So what you're going to do is locate the center two stitches of our chain. Because you chained an even number, there's not going to be one center stitch, there's going to be two center ones. So we're going to find those two here. So for me, I believe I chained 1, 2, and I'm going to say it's probably around here. I think it's these two right here. And then since I'm right-handed, I'm going to start here on my left because that's going to be my first stitch. And then I'll work this direction and then come back to the right. If you were left-handed, you would start with the stitch on the right and then work your way around, ending on the left here. So whichever one you're doing, doesn't matter. You're just going to insert your hook into one of those stitches. And then what we'll do is we will join our new yarn here with a slip stitch. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and chain one just to secure it. Once I chain one, I'm then going to half double crochet into that same stitch that I just joined into. And that gives me my very first half double crochet. I will then proceed to work a half double crochet into each chain along the underarm here until I get over here to this corner. Okay. I've now worked to the last chain, and notice that there's this big jump between where I ended and where the next stitch I need to work into is, because I need to start working around these sleeve stitches. But in order to deal with this big gap, if I just try to stitch there, it's going to create a big hole, and I do not want those. So what we're going to do is fill that hole in by doing random inserts, yarn overs, and pulling up loops. So I'm going to do my yarn over like I would if I'm about to start a regular half double crochet. Then in these next kind of little gaps here, I have about 3 or 4 of them here. I just insert my hook into one of those, yarn over, pull up a loop, I will then, before finishing this stitch, insert my hook into the next one, yarn over, pull up another loop. And then again, before I finish, I'm going to finish out over here, insert into this one, pull up a loop. And then finally, I will now be ready to work into this first stitch that I've stitch marked. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my stitch marker here. And then insert my hook one final time into that stitch, and then yarn over, pull up a loop, and I'll have all of these loops on my hook. Don't worry about that. It doesn't actually really matter how many loops you do as long as you're covering up this gap in between them. You'll then yarn over and just pull through everything on the hook. And what that does is it cinches all of that in, covers up that gap, but still only creates one stitch because you don't want to add any extra stitches to this stitch count. Otherwise, you're going to have a bigger opening for your sleeve than you need. As you saw, I had to do about 3 to 4 yarn over pullovers. That would be adding 8 extra stitches, and 8 stitches is going to be a pretty significant amount, so we don't want to do that. So that's why we want to make sure we do it all together. Once we do that, we are then going to proceed to work half double crochets across all of these stitches. So I'm going to yarn over, insert into my next stitch, and just half double crochet. And then what's great is that you're basically just working regular half double crochets, just like we did when we transitioned here on the yoke to the body. And you're just going to work those all the way around the edge until we get to this next corner where we're going to have to deal with that gap on this other side. So I'm going to go ahead and work my half double crochets all the way around. I'll meet you back up to show you how to do the gap on the other side. All right, I am now coming to the last stitch of the sleeve part before I get back to the underarm chain here. So I've got this one stitch, and then I've got these chains, and there's going to be a similar gap here. So I know that I ended up having to pull through 3 over here, so I'm going to have to do something very similar over here. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker, go ahead and work that last stitch. Then across these next kind of 3 gaps that are right here, I know I'm going to need to insert and pull up a loop before I work into the very first chain right here for my first stitch along the underarm. So I'll go ahead and do my yarn over. Then I'm going to insert my hook into this kind of little gap right there. Yarn over, pull up a loop. Then find this next kind of gap right here. Insert my hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. Then in this next gap right about here, I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull up a loop. Now I should be back to the chains along my underarm section here. So my very first stitch, which will be right here, I will insert, pull up my loop, and then I'll have all these loops on my hook, and then do the same thing I did on the other side. I'll yarn over and just pull through all of those loops, cinching that together so that there's no gap, but only creating one stitch here. And then I'll yarn over and start working stitches into the chains across the underarm, just like before. All right. Then once I get to this last stitch, I'll do my invisible join here into that very first stitch of the sleeve round. There we go. And that is the end of our first round of our sleeve. So then to begin the second round, I'm going to turn, and then I'm going to half double crochet into these underarm stitches just like normal. But then Once you get to the stitches that are going to start working around the edge where the yoke part was, we're actually going to need to work half double crochets in these third loops only. Because if you may recall, when we did transition from the yoke to the body, we had this ridge that we created by doing that half double crochet in the third loop only. And we want to continue that ridge around the sleeve section as well. So just on this second round of the sleeves, this is the only time we're going to need to do this, we're going to have half double crochet in the third loops only along the yoke edge. So as a reminder, you're going to find this third loop that's just here towards the front. You'll insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all three, and then that pushes the two loops of the top of the stitch to form that V that's going to create that ridge along the edge of our sleeve here. Now, as a reminder, we're not doing this in the ones on the underarm. The underarm doesn't need a ridge. It's just going to continue being smooth half double crochets. This is literally just on this one section where we are transitioning from the yoke to the sleeve. So I'll go ahead and work around the edge of mine here until I get back over to the underarm. Then once you get all the way around your sleeve edge here, looks like that's, I think, the last one I'm going to do. You'll then be back around to where that edging is going to continue pretty much more or less around the opening of the sleeve right about here. So now we're going to go ahead and continue working half double crochets into the rest of the underarm stitches here like normal. So we're going to go through both loops there, not the third loop anymore. Sorry, my sweater was getting a little unwieldy there. There we go. Okay, so now continue working just across the underarm. Then when I work into my last stitch, do my invisible join to the first stitch of the round. And now I'm ready to turn and then continue working. So now that I've done all that, all I'm going to be doing is just regular half double crochets because we've already transitioned. We don't need to create any more ridging. We're just going to do regular half double crochets around the sleeve opening, join, turn, and then keep going back and forth like that all the way until you create the sleeve. Now the other thing though is that for the tapering of the sleeve, we are going to have to do some decrease rounds. So I'm going to show you, this is not my decrease round yet because you're not going to decrease every round. And in your pattern, it's going to state which round you're going to decrease depending on your size. You can also adjust that depending on how, if you want fewer decreases, more decreases, or if you want the decrease to happen more rapidly at certain parts, you can adjust that as well. Or if you just want to follow exactly what the pattern says, you can try that and see if that works for your arm shape. But to do decrease rounds, when you get to one, it's going to be the same no matter if you're on the right side or the wrong side. You're going to start by just working a regular half double crochet into that very first stitch. But then across the next two, we're going to be doing our invisible decrease. So we're going to yarn over, insert our hook through just the front loop of this next stitch. Now, not the third loop, but the front loop. That's going to be this front one that's on the top towards us. We'll insert our hook into that front loop there. Then, without yarning over, we're going to insert into the next half double crochet here and go under both loops. So we'll go through the front loop of that next stitch, both loops of the stitch after that, then yarn over and pull through both of those stitches at the same time, just like that. Then we will yarn over and pull through 3 to complete our half double crochet. And what that does is it does a decrease, but does not really increase any kind of gapping or like, not increase gapping. Sorry, I'm thinking of increasing. It doesn't create a random set of 2 posts here. It's just one single stitch And so it makes that decrease a little bit less noticeable than if you were to do a traditional like work into the next stitch and then work a next stitch and then finish it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. You just do this decrease like normal for this pattern. So you'll do that for that first part. But then when you work all the way around and get back around to the other edge, sorry, I meant the other side, you're going to work until you have 3 stitches left of your round. And you'll do your decrease across these next 2. So go through that front loop only of this next stitch, then both loops of the stitch after that. Pull a loop through both of those stitches, then yarn over, pull through 3. You'll then have 1 stitch left to then do your last stitch and then your invisible join into your first stitch of the round. So that's how you're going to do any of your decrease rounds, right side, wrong side, it doesn't matter. You're just going to work your first stitch like normal, decrease across the next 2, work around the edge to the last 3 stitches, decrease across those 2, and then your last stitch, you'll do your invisible join. Now, once you do that, you'll then follow your decrease pattern all the way down your sleeve. Then you're going to work your cuff. And to work the cuff, you're going to do it exactly the same way as you do the bottom ribbing of your body. So once you get to that part, you can go back to that part of the video and then rewatch that if you need any help with the cuff. Then after that, you repeat everything that you just did here on the other side for your second sleeve. So I've got quite a bit of work ahead of me working at both of these sleeves, as do you too. So I'm going to join you back up once I'm done with both of those to talk to you about your finishing. Once you finish your sweater, you're going to weave in all of your loose ends, and then I strongly recommend doing a wet block. To do a wet block, all you have to do is soak your sweater in cold to lukewarm water. I definitely recommend using a wool wash of some kind, just so that way it gets you a nice scent and gets it nice and clean like I'm using here. Once you've let your sweater soak for about 15 to 30 minutes, you will drain your water, and then you will wring out any excess water that's in your sweater. One thing I try to do is run it through the final spin cycle of my washing machine, and I find that that is a very good way of squeezing out all of the excess water in my sweater. While it's still damp, you'll take your blocking mats and lay out your sweater to measurements, slowly shape it how you want to, and then you will insert pins. I like to use these blocking pins from Knitter's Pride because it lets me pin multiple pin points at once. As you pin and readjust your sweater over time and get it into the shape and measurements that you want, all you do is leave it to air dry overnight or for about 2 days, and then it's ready to remove and wear. I hope you found this tutorial video helpful. If you did, make sure you give it a like, and feel free to support my channel by subscribing, and that way you can also keep up on all of my future projects and tutorial videos as well. I would also absolutely love it if you followed me on Instagram and tagged me anytime you make any project using one of my patterns. I always love seeing your beautiful work. In the meantime, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.